So for each of the following problems, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to use all the rules that we studied before. Anytime we multiplied two terms, we added the exponents. Anytime we divided, we subtracted the exponents. And anytime we had something that was power of a power, basically we had something that looks like this: 2 to the 3 raised to the 6, which ends up 2 to the 3 times 6, which is 2 to the 18. And then calculate. You know how to do these, use them. Now we'll go through each of the problems. The first one, we get this: 3 to the 6 minus 4, which is 3 squared, which is 9. The second we get, you'll notice that we have negative 4 raised to nothing, so we have to put a 1 there. So what we end up having as our result is going to be 2 plus 1 as our exponent, which is negative 4 in brackets all cubed, which is negative 64 as our final answer. Now 5 squared is basically, 5 squared squared is power of a power, so it looks something like this. Let's go and do the problem. So this one's going to be 5 to the 2 times 2, which is 5 to the 4, which is 625. The next problem comes out to be this. It's negative 2 to the 3 because 12 minus 9 here and here gives us 3 as our exponent. Final answer is negative 8. Next answer ends up being 32,768. The result in the calculator will give us the following, which gives us this as our final answer. Remember, when we start with anything that's a negative exponent, we need to flip it first. So we end up having 1 over 4 cubed. Then we calculate 4 cubed to be 1 over 64 as our final answer. For the next one, you notice how we have a negative sign on the base. Keep the negative sign, raise it to the power of 2, but everything goes over underneath the 1. So now we end up 1 over negative 6 squared, which ends up being 1 over 36. Now, remember I told you that we could have the opposite of something, of the opposite happening if we have a negative on the bottom. So essentially, we basically flip this problem. 8 to the negative 2 on the bottom turns out to be 8 to the 2 over 1, which ends up being 64. Now for this last fraction, remember we need to flip it. Flip it first, so it ends up being 3 over 2 raised to the 5. Now we apply the 5 to the 3 and the 2. So we get 3 to the 5 over 2 to the 5, which ends up being, well, 3 to the 5 ends up being 243, and 2 to the 5 ends up being 32. And we leave our answer as that unless we can find a lower fraction, a lowered fraction, a simplified fraction. So now what we're going to do is we're going to combine all the 5 rules to evaluate expressions. The first thing that you have to use is you have to use your power of a power rule. So that's the last thing. Then you have to use your multiplication or division rule. And then the last thing that you have to apply is your 0 or negative exponent rule. Now the reason why that is because of bedness, if you think about it. Think about bedmas. Bedmas basically tells us to do the brackets first. So if we have power of a power, we have to simplify what's in the bracket first. And then we pull the stuff together. And then we do our division, and then we do our multiplication. Okay? Let's begin. Now when we take a look at our first problem, we have power of a power and multiplication occurring. Now I need you to remember, when we do these problems, we're always going to start with our powers, then we're going to do our multiplication of our multiplication and division rules, and then we're going to do our zero and negative exponent rules to do the final stage if we need to. Now, the first problem we have is 2 to the 2 cubed, which gives us 2 to the 6, because the two exponents on the top, the 2 and the 3, get multiplied. And now we do the same for the second exponents. So we have -1 times 2, which will give us -2. Now we're going to use our multiplication and division rules to pull all the exponents together, because it's just multiplication. So we get 2 to the exponent of, I think, 6 plus bracket -2. Now this is, once you get better at this, you don't have to do that step. You can just write this 2 to the 4 as the addition of 6 plus -2. We calculate the final answer and get 16. Now let's move on to question B. So now we have fractions. So we're still going to try to remember that we have those rules to follow. Now if you can recall, we always use power of a power first, multiplication and division next, and then zero and negative exponents. For this first problem, we have two bases which are 2/3, and we have two different exponents, but we have a division between them. So now what we're going to write is we're going to write 2/3 all in brackets raised to the, well, 5 minus 7, which will give us the next line, which will be, well, 5 minus 7, just punch that in your calculator. You're going to get 2/3 all raised to the -2. Now, since we've just finished our multiplication and division, we have to look at our zero and negative exponents rule. So if it's a negative exponent and it's a fraction, we have to flip the fraction right away. So it's going to be, instead of 2/3, it's going to be 3/2. Do is I'll try to highlight the zero and negative exponent rule that we talked about earlier, and we should get the following for our final fraction. It should be, well, 3/2 all raised to the 2. Now we're going to apply the 2 to drop the brackets. We apply the 2 to every exponent, every base, and we end up with 3 squared over 2 squared, which ends up being 9. Divided by 4. Now let's take a look at question 4C. That one's going to be a special question because we have a mixture of power of a power, division and multiplication, and zero and negatives. So the first thing we got to do is we got to use our power of a power to simplify as much as we can right away. So the very first bracket has 4 to the 0 raised to the -6. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write that as basically 4 to the 0 times -6, and then we're going to write division, and then, well, if it was -4, we'd leave the bracket. We got rid of it this time, and then we can do the same for the last bit. So now 0 times -6 is just 0, so our next line will have 4 to the exponent 0. And then we're going to divide that by 4 to the 2. And then we're going to times that by 4 to the -2. Now what we have to do for these operations is we're going to have to take a look at each individual part and then write the last bit. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to combine the 4 to the 0 divided by 4 squared. Moving on, when we do the calculation, we're going to get 4 to the 0 divided by 4 squared, and that's going to end up being 4 to the negative 2, because 0 minus 2 is negative 2. And then we bring down the last bit, 4 to the negative 2. Now, because we have multiplication, we're going to combine these two. So we get, well, 4 to the negative 2 to the negative 2 plus negative 2, which gives us the following, 4 to the negative 4, which is 1 over 4 to the 4, which, when we calculate, the bottom half of the fraction is 256. So now let's move on to question D. So what we have to do immediately is we have to apply power of a power to everything. And remember, we have to follow our rules. Power of power, then multiplying, and then division rules. And then we're going to follow our 0 and negative exponent rules. So let's go. Right away, we're going to get 2 to the 18 because we're going to multiply these two parts, the negative 3 and the negative 6. And that gives us our positive 18. Now, let's just make sure our base is properly packaged. Remember, it is negative 2. So normally you guys would drop the minus sign and it's like, nope, can't do it. You have to keep the base. Whatever you're raising, whatever your base is, has to be copied down. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly do the same for the second part. So we're going to have negative 2 all raised to the 16 because we multiplied the 8 and the 2 from the exponent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the multiplication and division rules for these two parts. Because it's division, we must subtract. So now we're just going to go and write the following. This is negative 2 raised to the 2, which ends up being 4. Your homework today is found on page 369, number 8, 10, and 14. I've also provided the questions online for you to work on. Good luck, guys. Have a good day.